Hello, Ken. How are you this very fine evening?
This is a very fine evening, Dan, and it's finer because you're here with me. I'm doing great, thanks.
Ken, let's get crafty. What is this all about?
I've always wanted to. It's about an amazing experience I had this past weekend with two of my nieces. They were both married about 2 years ago, within 2, 3 weeks of each other, and they both got pregnant, and they're expecting babies within 2 or 3 weeks of each other in the next month or so. So we had a combined baby shower for them with about 20 friends and my husband, Bob, and myself. So it was the gay uncles and a group of women. So we were like in our element, having a great time. And what I loved about it was that my sister-in-law had really been thoughtful about how she was going to construct the day. And so, instead of the typical party games you might have, we had 3 craft stations. We made beeswax candles. We made like homemade candles. I had never done that before. And we also dyed raw silk. I made a beautiful handkerchief for myself that actually looks really good. And then we did some work called felting, where you take a piece of felt and using a particular little tool and a mold, you can create a leaf or a rose or a variety of other things that she was going to assemble in these mobiles for the kids once they're born. So they were super meaningful things. And they all relied on us cooperating with each other, participating with each other, guiding and counseling each other, because there were some women there who were like expert in this. They actually had cottage businesses built around these different things. And we had a chance to learn and to teach and to share and to cooperate and to be in community and to be in small communities as well. So that part was just amazing by itself. The most meaningful part, though, came after that as we were closing out the afternoon's festivities. There was a big ball of yarn, and we all were sitting in a somewhat of a circle, and one of the moms-to-be tied the yarn around her wrist and then handed the ball off to the first person there. And everybody was asked to give some sort of a blessing or share some words of wisdom. And there were a lot of moms that were there. And so there was plenty of wisdom to be shared about childbirth and about child raising, or just to share an anecdote, whatever it happened to be, share something that would be meaningful. And as each person shared, they wrapped the yarn around their wrist and passed it to the next person. When we got all the way around, everyone was connected. We cut the cord, if you will, tied it off, and we're going to keep this on until the baby's born. The thing that really struck me, Dan, in all of this was those little bits of sharing. And I thought, man, there is nothing here except the truth. There's not like, surface level truth. There's not like, we're going to go halfway down truth. This was like, now we're going to immerse ourselves and just literally speak from our hearts with nothing, absolutely nothing withheld. And it involved 3 things. It involved risk, like risk to be vulnerable, a risk that you weren't going to like make it through without crying. And most people did, because this was so deeply meaningful. So it involved risk. It also involved a willingness to just say what's on your heart without hesitation and to be okay with that. And it involved an unknowingness, like, I don't know exactly where this is going to lead. And several people said, I didn't know I was going to say this, but, and then they said it. And so I thought about like, what would happen if we actually could have conversations in our lives at home, in our lives at work, in our lives at play, in our lives at prayer, whatever it was. What would happen if we could have conversations that were just at that level? Like, we didn't have to know what was coming next. We just knew that we were going to be honest. We were going to speak with kindness, of course, but we were going to be honest. We were going to be vulnerable. We didn't have to know the way that it was going to go or the way that it was going to end. and we would take that risk to do that. How could things be different if we shared at that level at the outset? Because my experience is that sometimes we do get there, but we get there after several exchanges over time, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And finally, it's like, well, I wanted to say this in the beginning, but I didn't. But here's really what I wanted to say. What would happen if we just said what we wanted to say, what was on our heart from the outset?
So this reminds me, I don't know how this reminds me of this, but that movie with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, where they go to that place, what is it called? Where they all wear masks. And I don't know why that reminded me of that, but I was thinking about crafts and getting crafty and then being your authentic self. So anyway, forget that movie, everything about it, except for the fact that they all walk in with masks. And the reason they do that is so they can be someone other than their true selves, right? That they're almost nobody. They're literally just, the body and not the person that's behind the mask. And it made me think about a book that is by a gentleman named Lewis Howes. And he has a great podcast doing really well called The School of Greatness. And he wrote a book called The Masks of Masculinity. And obviously that's for men. But he was talking about how, or I guess anybody can have masculinity. But anyway, he talked about how men specifically wear masks. And a lot of times we're wearing a mask about how people think we should be, right? So in this situation as a football player, like in his example, I need to come across tough. Like if I get hurt, I can't show that I'm hurt because that would look less than tough. Or in a relationship, I need to look like this. Like, so he's talking about almost like we put on a mask to fit the role that we need to play in certain situations. And I was thinking about that's what connected in my mind, because the connection between things that we're creating, like Ken, you were creating little crafts and like doing projects, right? And then at the same time, you thought the big takeaway was that openness, that vulnerability, that ability to like leave it all there. And I was thinking that's the opposite. I think what most people do in life is that we literally just walk around wearing the mask so we're not vulnerable, so we're not open, so like we can hide behind that. And most of the time, this is the thing we should care about the least, but it's the thing we care about the most, which is other people's opinions of us. So the moment we're vulnerable, the moment we take off that mask and are just open and honest and direct, we're at risk of our greatest fear not being good enough, or people, obviously in this case, judging us as not being good enough. Like, what if they see my true authentic self? What if I express my true authentic feelings? That is the biggest risk of it all. So my big takeaway so far is just that recognize where you wear a mask in your life, and then challenge yourself to see if you could take it off metaphorically and be vulnerable. If you could show people who you really are and stop playing a part of who they think you should be. I know I've said this before in a previous podcast, but I like it. It comes from the gentleman who wrote a book called about being a monk. He was a real monk for a while. I'm trying to think of his name. Anyway, he, do you know his name, Ken? You can edit that part out. I'll think of it. Anyway, so he wrote a book about being a monk. And in it, he said, you are not who you think you are. You are not who other people think you are. You are what you think other people think you are. And I'm paraphrasing that, and I may have got it imperfect. But the point of the story is, please take a risk and stop being the person who you think other people think you should be, and start trying out the person that you actually are and see how that goes for you.
That's a great quote. You think of like the level of convoluted that you have to get to in order to then determine your own behavior, because then it's all based on that. There's nothing authentic about it. There's nothing in the moment about it. There's nothing risk-taking about it. And yet the biggest risk of all is that you're not going to share your authentic self with other people. And I remember years ago, I was executive director for a national nonprofit. We were doing our biggest fundraiser in New York City, and I was talking about inclusion, and I was using my mom as an example, and I was talking about just her sense of welcome and hospitality at the table. And I grew up in a food family. I'm Armenian and Assyrian, and food is what we do. We do it to celebrate, we do it to mourn, we do it when things are going just okay. We eat. It's what we do. Everything happened around the table. It's where I got this appreciation for what that's like. And we always had enough food for just in case 75 people stopped over, because you never knew. And Mom would always stand up before we ate, and she would lift a glass of wine and just look around the table and say, "You are all welcome here." And it became this thing that just stuck with me. Like, her brand was hospitality without her even knowing any of the terminology. It was just, that's what it was. And I'm standing in front of hundreds of people, and a very formal night, making this great presentation just before the pitch for funds. And as I'm saying that, I literally felt myself transported back to our dining room. My mom had died back in 1999, and this was only, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. But I felt myself transported back. I could smell the food. I could feel the presence of others around us. I saw the candles on the table, and I just choked up and had to stop. And the room went dead silent. And I managed to continue, finished everything up. We raised the most we'd ever raised that night. And afterwards, I can't count the number of people that came up and said, "Thank you for speaking from your heart. Thank you for just like sharing a real story instead of a canned fundraising pitch." And that's one of the reasons that we were just inclined to give, because if that's who you are and you're leading this organization, that's what we want to contribute to. So on every level, authenticity pays off, just to use a crude term. It just does. And I can't say enough about how I think we need this as a world right now, for people just to speak from their hearts, and like you were saying, Dan, without any masks, without any thought about what I think that you think I should be, and instead just to speak without any kind of preconception, but authentically.
So the name of the movie was Eyes Wide Shut. So now I'm asking you to make your eyes wide open to the mask that you're wearing. And the name of the person who was the monk is Jay Shetty, and his book is called Think Like a Monk. So those are the answers to the two questions that I had for myself as I was formulating my thoughts. And as I was formulating my thoughts, I was thinking about rituals to accomplish exactly what we're talking about here. Just yesterday, I was with a sales team, and the ritual that we did to allow people to be more vulnerable and to open their eyes to what's possible was we went out into the parking lot. We were in the conference room. We went out to the parking lot, small group of people, maybe 15, and we had a tennis ball, and we'd have this back and forth. And so if you were the question asker, you would throw the tennis ball to somebody, and then you have to answer that question, right? And then that person would throw it to someone else, and they, when you move it around until everybody was included. But it ritualized something that, without putting structure to it, without getting crafty, we would have been probably in a room going, who wants to share? Who wants to volunteer? Who wants to go next, right? And in every group, you see the same people doing that, right? The person who perceives themselves as outgoing is the person who's always like, oh, I'll share, I'll go first. And it is what it is. But in every group, I always go first. And I always say I'll be the group leader. So that's my persona, or that's how I've identified myself. But the ability to, if you're trying to accomplish that, do what we started this with Ken, where he's somewhere and we're going to do something. You may have not done this before, and they pull out some things some crafts, right? And they do this ritual that allows you to have some meaning behind what you're trying to accomplish, right? Do you really have to wear that bracelet until birth? No, but there's meaning you've attached to the creation of that, and then the wearing of that and everything that goes with it. So I would say, especially if you have a group, if you're in a company and you run a company and you're trying to get people to put their eyes wide open and to share and be vulnerable and to show their true selves, then turn it into some sort of game, some sort of craft, some sort of ritual. And then everybody can feel that social proof of this is what we're all doing, right? And they get to see people who go before them. So that person who raises their hand first and says, I'll go first, or I'll be the leader, they get to watch that person do what they're about to do. They get to think in their own mind like, wow, I never saw that person that way. And they get a new perspective on maybe themselves. They're watching the whole group go through this experience together.
So I think two great points that you just made. The first is that there was something significant about those crafts that we did in advance of this other piece. I still think people would have shared at a deep level, but this was a group that knew each other, and so they had some familiarity and fluency with that. But I think there's great value on a business level in particular with thinking clearly about like, what are the kinds of things that we want to inspire in people and what can we create in order to do that? Quick example about the candle making. You take this wick and you hold it like 3 fingers, dip it in the wax, pull it up, go to the next station, dip it in cold water, it sets, and then you take your hands and you smooth it out, and then you walk around. And they set this up as a table so that we were all just kind of in this procession. Made me think of former monk, Mr. Shetty, I guess formerly Brother Shetty. But it made me think of like that because it's very sort of labyrinth. It's very ritualistic in this exercise of walking. And what I noticed as I was paying attention to this was focus just sort of came in. People were paying attention to what they were doing. People were assisting each other. People were coaching one another. The conversation became like really rhythmic as we all started walking, and we all sort of picked up on each other's vibe with like how long somebody took to dip, and then how long somebody took to cool, and then how long somebody took to straighten and then to move around, and everyone just sort of fell into sync. And there was something magical about that. But all of those things, that communal action, that sharing, that rhythm, all of that stuff, and then congratulating each other as you saw these candles like literally grow in front of your eyes. It's like, I just made a candle. This is amazing. And congratulating each other on this seemingly small success, but everybody felt so good, like we had accomplished something individually and communally. And I think it was those actions that allowed us then to just step into this exercise and do so well. And the second piece, Dan, to your point, this is a great place for leaders to lead with vulnerability. You know, if you're a leader, don't sit back and think, you know, I'm going to wait for the most introverted out here. We'll get him out of his shell. It's like, no, you get him out of his shell, or you get her out of her shell by you stepping out, being vulnerable, and setting an example. Right? Be that person to go and say, here's what's up for me, you know, and I need your help. I can't solve this on my own. I don't have all the answers. Lead with that kind of vulnerability. Lead with that kind of heart sharing, and watch as your employees line up behind you to follow you wherever you take them.
In conclusion, get crafty, get creative, think like a monk, eyes wide open, and be the person that you want to be. Don't be the person that you think they think you are. Take off that mask and be vulnerable.